have prepared, great. We have prepared a quick interactive question for you. We'd love to get a sense of who is in the room and which fields you work in. So we have a very quick question with Mentimeter. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, maybe now. I think it's coming, but we still can't see it. Yes. Yes, great. Now, yes. Can you all see the question? Great. So you can join by going on menti.com and use the code that you see at the beginning of the slides. And this 83794938. And then you can take a moment to share your response, and the results will be live on the screen. So we can also see the diversity of backgrounds represented here today. Great. Children's rights, NGO, women's rights, public health, domestic abuse. Perpetrator work, great. Youth justice, research. That's great. Amazing. So many different fields with us here today. Statistics as well. Wow, interesting. Okay, great. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating and also for taking the time to be here with us today. Just as an introduction, we will start with two presentations and we will move to the panel discussion. If you have any questions for our speakers, just feel free to use the chat and we will have space for them at the end of the webinar. And before introducing our speakers and getting started with the webinar, we will just take a few seconds to introduce WWP and CFJ. So my name is Sara Prifti and I am the reporting and membership manager at WWP. We are an umbrella organization, a feminist umbrella organization founded in 2014, and we currently unite 82 members from 35 European countries. And our members include perpetrator programs, but also researchers and victim support services. And our goal is to foster accountable, safe, and effective victim-centered and gendered-informed perpetrator work in Europe. And we do so by many different ways. So we do research, we have projects, we do training and capacity building. And for example, we have also developed the European standards for perpetrator program, which serve as recognized basis to ensure safe and effective perpetrator intervention. I will now give the floor to our colleague Mariama from CFJ.
Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you very much, Sarah. Very pleased to be here. I'm Mariama Diallo, the coordinator of the Child Friendly Justice European Network. And I like to call each other a bit of a sister network of the European Network on the work with perpetrators of domestic violence. This is our first joint webinar together. We wanted to bring a perspective to you, a bit cross-perspective on the work around domestic violence when children are involved. And our network is a network that is a bit young network because we were created officially in, let's say, 2022, and we gather 40 members across 21 European countries. Our members, they are NGO service providers, they work also in the academia, and they are also individual experts, all working for and with children in contact with the justice system. Our vision is to make sure that every child that has to go through the justice system is well taken care of, that their rights are respected and understood and protected. So we also, the way that WWP does, we have various events, we have annual seminars, we have webinars like this. We publish also advocacy documents to push a bit, let's say, the European stakeholders to advance legislation around to integrate really child-friendly justice. And we also develop list. We develop fact sheets, and we put a bit out there different resources for practitioners to be able to know how to better work with children and better understand the rights of children that are in contact with the justice system, being it as victims, as witness, also as suspect or accused, and also when they are in administrative justice. So very pleased to be with you here today, and I'll give back the floor now to Sarah for the continuing with the general introduction. And I wish all of you a good panel, and don't hesitate in the chat to say where you are from, and if you want to interact with us, please, we like a lot of interaction with you.
Great, thank you very much, Mariama. So we're ready to start. I would like to give the floor to our first speaker today, Sandra Jovanovic, the Training and Capacity Building Manager at WWP. Sandra will be presenting on Children Are Always Victims, Rethinking Witnessing in Domestic Violence. Sandra, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everybody. I will just quickly share my screen and just check if you can see it okay, if that's fine. Okay. So welcome, everybody. I'm also very happy that we have a chance to speak about this important topic and that we can do it in such cross-sectoral way as Mariama mentioned. I am a psychologist by education, and I come from the professional experience of working with both victims of violence or women and children in a shelter, but then also running a perpetrator program for a while and working with perpetrators of domestic violence. And for the last 5 years, I'm in the role of training and capacity building manager in WWP, meaning that I'm in a position to interact with different programs across Europe. So my perspective will integrate all these insights, so both victim perspective, including women and children, but also the perspective of working with perpetrators and perpetrator programs across Europe. So let me move on. So I would like to start with imagining process. And I would like to invite you to think about 2 boys. One boy, I called him Mark, and another boy, I called him John. And what I can tell you about Mark is that he lives in a family in which there is a violence of his father against his mother. And his father is also occasionally beating him up. He also shouts at him and he threatens him. So this is, in a nutshell, how Mark is growing up. And please reflect for yourselves. You can also share it in the chat. What are your thoughts? How is Mark feeling in his home? And also, what are your thoughts about how will this situation that he is living in impact his development and well-being in the future? And I will give you a few seconds to think about it. And then I will also introduce you to John. So John is a boy similar age, and he's also living in a family where there is a violence from the side of his father against his mother. However, the situation is slightly different. So John doesn't see any of the physical abuse. And his parents also try as much as they can that he doesn't see or hear anything of their arguing or of his father's violence. So let's say that violent incidents are not happening in front of him. And then please also think about, so how is John feeling in his home? And how is this situation impacting his development and well-being in a longer term? And will this be different from Mark's experience in terms of the impact of violence on the development and well-being? I'm not able to see the chat at the moment, but
Yes.
hopefully there are
Yeah, we have a few
Uh-huh.
comments. Valeria says Mark is probably anxious. Warren says life-limiting health issues. Kate says that they are scared, preoccupied, distracted, angry, and ashamed. Francis says witnessing violence can have the same effect on the well-being and development of children as being a direct victim of violence. This can either be witnessing the violence itself as well as witnessing the effects of violence.
Yeah, amazing. Okay.
And then we also have last comment from Selina, confusion of what love and care is, frightened. For John, even if he doesn't see them, children are aware of emotional undercurrents. They will both be scared. Seeing violence might condition Mark to normalize it.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Great contributions. Thank you. I believe that you were also reflecting about, how are there any differences? If we look not so far ago, many professionals, both working in the child protection or in the justice system or psychologists, or they would say that actually John is in a much better position than Mark because he's not directly abused. And they would say that, okay, that's actually good. They are trying not to remove him from the situation. It's not so bad. And probably John will have less consequences longer term. And also at the moment, he's probably experiencing less immediate impact than Mark. However, fortunately, things have developed and we have learned a lot. And we know that we have so many research now without any doubt claiming and firmly standing on a position that there is no difference in the impact of domestic violence between children who witness it or children who are directly harmed. I've screened for the research that actually compares groups of children who were directly exposed to violence and groups of children who were witnessing violence to compare these kind of groups. And all these research, and there were many more, show the same, that actually both immediate impact, but also long-term impact is the same or similar, or even if there are some slight differences, they are not statistically significant. So what does this tell us? So it tells us that actually witnessing domestic violence is a very misleading term because it tells us that it's something different than being exposed to domestic violence and that you are a passive observer of something that is happening to somebody else. This research, but also the experience of practitioners and victim support services working in the field show that this is not the case, and that whenever we have children involved in domestic violence cases, we need to think about them as children who are impacted by domestic violence or exposed to domestic violence. And this is also showing us that we need to move away from understanding violence as incidents and then thinking about, okay, was the child exposed to a certain incident of this or that kind? We need to remember and remind ourselves always that this is a pattern, that this is the atmosphere of power and control that you feel and that impacts on you even if you are not there when the incidents happen. Just I would say a quick reminder on why is this happening and why are we facing this kind of situation, regardless if somebody is directly exposed to domestic violence or not. I always like to use the attachment theory, but also the work of Harlov before Bowlby and attachment theory that actually shows, you probably all know this experiment, that when rhesus monkeys were put in an environment where they could interact with the wire so-called mom that was also holding a bottle and was able to feed the monkey, but also to interact with furry mom doll that was warm and was kind of simulating the experience of being with another being of your species, that actually monkeys were spending all the time, except for the feeding, on the furry mom, and that they were using it to comfort themselves, to support themselves, and yeah, they were basically spending much more time, and they were bonding with this doll. This is something that is reminding us always that also for us as human beings, bonding and attachment is something essential, and that we shouldn't undermine it. And that in cases of violence, actually the security of this bonding and attachment is affected in so many ways that it actually does impact on our development, both in terms of physical and mental well-being, but then also different aspects of our life, from school, work, intimate relations, socialization, and so on. So we need to remember this and to keep this in mind. This is actually a scheme of Kate Ivey, who you will meet in a few minutes, that she brought to one of our trainings, that is actually illustrating very well that there are different pathways how a child can be harmed in a family. So the most obvious way is that perpetrator is harming a child directly. And we know that in cases in the families where there is intimate partner violence against a mother, there is more probability that also there will be direct abuse of a child. But also through the exposure to parental domestic abuse to non-abusive parent, and then this impacts a child in different ways, or that actually the perpetrator can directly try to undermine the mother's relationship with the child and disrupts the relationship between the mother and the child directly or indirectly through actually influencing mother's parental capabilities because she's exposed to domestic violence always. So we need to remember that, and we need to know that. And probably many of you are aware that things are slowly changing, and that actually all this knowledge and experience and research has led to some significant changes in some countries that are actually legislative changes, and that there are some countries that actually recognize that children in situations of domestic violence are victims in their own right. I don't have the statistics on how many countries did this, but I think that at least in Europe, it's very few still, and that there are more and more countries that don't think about this in this way. But also, we are witnessing that actually even as there is a knowledge about this and awareness and experience, still this is not implemented in the practice in the right way. A few weeks ago, I was in a position to participate in the European Conference on Domestic Violence, and I was overwhelmed by the research again showing what we were just speaking about, what is the impact of children in the situations of domestic violence, even if they're not directly targeted, let's say, but also the research that is bringing and highlighting so many problems in the practice, in the judiciary system, in child protection system, in perpetrator programs. So it's really important that we speak about this and that we focus on this aspect and try to really improve the practice, because that's the only way how we will reach the lives of children and the victims, the adult victims. And I wanted to, again, probably remind you on the 3 planets model of Professor Marianne Hester, that from my angle is really well describing how different systems are not aligned and how they don't function well together. And why is that? And I really like the metaphor that she's saying. When you look at these systems, if you look just at one system, in that system, things make sense. But it's like they're living in different planets. They act according to different laws, they act according to different priorities, and they have different things in mind. So she was saying there is a domestic violence planet, and people living there are professionals that look at domestic violence as crime. They focus on ensuring that this is adequately prosecuted, that there are legal consequences, that victim is protected, and that somehow perpetrator is controlled, and they're focused on adults. So even if the child is involved, they're usually looking only at the adult victim. Then there is a child protection planet, and professionals living there are focused on ensuring child's well-being. And then in cases of domestic violence, they are focused, okay, how can we make sure that this child is safe? And sometimes in this planet, we face the situations in which they actually put a lot of pressure on the adult victim, the mother, that she needs to protect the child, that she needs to leave the perpetrator, that she needs to leave the house, that she needs to make sure that he doesn't enter and break the protection order and so on, because they are so focused on children and their well-being without considering other aspects. And then there is a child contact planet where they function according to different laws. This is usually a family law. And they are focused on ensuring that every child has a contact with both parents. And then they don't receive any information from domestic violence planet or from child protection planet, and they are focused only on this. So this is just to illustrate it. I know we will be speaking more about this during our webinar, and that actually the webinar will help us to align these planets and ensure that there is a better communication and that both women and children victims are centered in all these planets. So yeah, that would be ideal. And I was also reflecting on, okay, so what about perpetrator programs? Are they on a completely different planet? Or maybe they have a continent in domestic violence planet, and how they are contributing to this whole situation. And I ended up with saying that, yeah, probably they're on domestic violence planet with a specific continent where professionals who work with perpetrators of domestic violence live. And they are very focused on the perpetrator, and they are very focused on ensuring that violence doesn't repeat. In some good examples, they're also connected with victim support services, but they are mainly focused on adult victims, not really the children. And as this is the background that we are coming from, I also wanted to highlight a few critical issues that we as perpetrator programs need to be aware of in this context. So we can definitely contribute either to the safety and well-being of children and their mothers, or we can increase risks and even unintentionally we can make harm to those for whom we are here for. So we definitely always need to think, okay, what are the service-generated risks if a man is participating in the program? And how can other institutions interpret this? Will they maybe drop the case and say everything is fine now? Or will they maybe say, okay, now they can he can see a child, everything is fine now, he's in a program? Also, when we are writing reports, how other institutions will interpret that. If we only say that he's very motivated and he comes to every session. So we need to be aware of that. Also, what are the grounds on which we are basing our assessment on father's skill and capacities for parenting? And how can we know that actually there is real change and that there is safety for a child? And are we considering and integrating this kind of information that is also coming from the victims and victims services, but also from the child protection agencies? Also, how well are we integrating child perspective into our program and all our actions in different levels? And also, how can we support the process of keeping perpetrators accountable, not only in our program? Because I really believe that as perpetrator programs, we do have the responsibility to proactively engage with other stakeholders and make sure that they are also held accountable as fathers by child protection, by courts, by other institutions, and stay very much involved in this process. And let's say being a satellite that is going to visit all these planets and help that they understand better the situation and perpetrators' accountability. So I will stop here and thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. And yeah, I really hope that our work will contribute to aligning all the planets.
Great. Thank you very much, Sandra, for your presentation and for this clear explanation of the impact of domestic violence on children and why they should not be considered just as witnesses. I would like to invite now our second speaker, Linda Zaiane, manager of the Child Rights Coordination Office at the Deutsches Kinderhilfswerk. Who will introduce us to the importance of a child-friendly justice approach in domestic violence cases for the next 10 minutes. So, Linda, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. We can't. Yeah.
Sorry, it didn't react.
Yes, now we can see you.
Now
we can hear you.
Try to start the presentation, but I have.
We can see your presentation like that also, Linda.
Yeah, I just try to. Like this, it's better, I think. Sorry about that. So I'm happy to present here today, and I'm going to talk about the importance of a child-friendly justice approach in domestic violence cases, but actually also in general. And for that, I'm going to give a bit of the legal and normative background, and then explain what are the components of child-friendly justice, and then draw a bit a parallel or a conclusion from a research that we carried out as Deutsches Kinderhilfswerk together with the German Human Rights Institution, and present our findings and recommendations. So to give a bit of a context and why this topic matters. So children can be affected by legal proceedings in various ways. Today we are going to focus on children in domestic violence cases. And it is important to understand that only when their rights are guaranteed, also during the process, the proceedings, only then the decisions can be taken in a way that they realize children's rights. So when children are experiencing domestic violence and are involved in such cases, there can either be a process in penal law where they are victims and witnesses of crimes, or they can also be affected by custody and visitation rules, and then it's a family law proceeding. And justice can, or the experience with the justice system can either re-traumatize children or, if carried out in a way protecting children's rights, also support them and protect them. And depending on what experience they are going through, they have trust in the rule of law, or they can be re-traumatized. And it's very important to be aware that the child-friendly justice is a legal obligation under the CRC, but also under European standards. I don't have the time to talk about all the legal provisions that are important. And I also don't know what background our audience has, but of course the core provisions of the CRC are Article 3, the best interests of the child shall be a primary consideration. And we also have general comments that specify certain articles of the convention and give the states a bit of, like, give them more guidance how to implement the articles. And in general comment 14, it is made clear that the best interest principle is a substantive right, but it's also a legal principle and a procedural rule, meaning that also during a legal process, everything has to be in accordance with the best interests of the child, not only in the decision at the end. And then we have Article 12, the right to express the views freely, and the views of the child have also to be being given due weight. So it's not enough to just listen to children. Also in proceedings, we have to listen carefully and then use this, what we hear, the children's opinions. Of course, depending also on the maturity of children. That means that they have to be given the opportunity to be heard in any judicial and administrative proceedings that affect them. And also there we have a general comment that gives us more guidance, and where is spelled out that how proceedings can be done in a child-friendly way, that also the atmosphere and the setting has to be child-friendly, that this is important to give information to children, that they know about their rights and that they know what decisions are being taken in a proceeding, and also that they are given feedback in the end, how they were understood and what was done, or how this was included in the final decision, what they had to say. And it is also clear that a child who is scared will not be a good witness. So there is also an interest by the court or by the state, by the police, to have children participate in a child-friendly manner. And I also want to mention that there is a draft general comment by the UN Committee on Children's Rights, which has not been published yet, but which is certainly very important to mention because it is a general comment on the access to justice for children, and it addresses barriers that children face to access justice, and it gives guidance to states on creating systems, justice systems that protect children's rights and to address the challenges they face. We also have the guidelines of the Council of Europe on child-friendly justice, where child-friendly justice is defined as the effective implementation of all children's rights at the highest attainable level. And then they give more examples in depth and say in particular justice that is accessible, age appropriate, also speedy and adapted to and focused on the needs and rights of the child. Also due process is mentioned. Then of course the right to participation and to understand the proceedings, respect for private and family life, and to integrity and dignity of children. Certainly, the Istanbul Convention has also to be mentioned when we talk about domestic violence. Also, in the Istanbul Convention is mentioned the best interest of the child, and also that the rights and needs of child witnesses of violence have to be respected and protected and implemented by states. And then there are several other articles that mention that the children have to be safe also in custody and contact decisions, that they have to be financial resources, data collection and research, but also training of professionals on domestic violence. So there are many components of child-friendly justice. In Germany, we made the experience that it made sense to translate this international framework into practical guidelines based on German law. And I'm sure that also in other countries, there is this tendency that laws are not seen in the same way if there isn't made the linkage to the national laws. So we worked in a process to make this kind of translation. This was the first step, and in this practical guidelines, we spelled out that children have the right to be heard in court proceedings, that the hearings or interrogations have to be child-friendly, and specified then about the communication and the setting, what is meant by a child-friendly setting, that in penal law we need the possibility of video interrogation, that children don't need to tell the story again and again to different people. Also that there are protective measures, for example, that they don't meet with the perpetrators at court, that also the professionals know how to identify the special and specific needs of children in the specific case, and then that they don't talk to all children in the same way. This concerns, of course, also the child-friendly information on what is going on. They want to understand what their rights are, and therefore also the material has to be child-friendly and to be developed really with children. And the decisions in the end also need to explain in a child-friendly way. And of course, this was also mentioned in the child-friendly guidelines by the Council of Europe, that the consideration of children's perception of time is a really important factor in a proceeding. Children need support before, during, and after the proceedings. In family law, this is in many countries a guardian ad litem. In penal law, often a psychosocial support person, but it can also be other support services. And the professionals involved in the proceedings should also work together in the best interests of the child. So that means interdisciplinary cooperation is important. One model is, of course, the Barnehus model, but this interdisciplinary cooperation can also be ensured in other ways. And then professionals have, of course, to have the qualification, for example, on child-friendly communication, on children's rights, and have to be sensitive to domestic violence dynamics and risks. And it's also important that they undergo further training and that this training is mandatory.
Linda, I'm so sorry. I hate to interrupt, but we're nearly at time. Would you mind sharing with us your closing remarks in a minute?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just to say that evaluation is also very important for the states, and that this evaluation has to be based on children's experiences. So our results of our research was that there are many structural gaps, that there are regional disparities, that not everywhere in Germany child-friendly justice is implemented in the same way, and that often it depends on the individual engagement of professionals, that there is a lack of systematic data and of coordinating institutions, and that also the training needs to be implemented in law. So we need binding standards which make training mandatory, and that professionals, even if they want to be trained, they don't always have the opportunities, for example, due to workload. So our recommendations are at the system level are to strengthen the resources put in to make proceedings child-friendly, then also to anchor the criteria for child-friendly justice in law, where still gaps exist, and to institutionalize interdisciplinary cooperation, and of course to have regular monitoring and data collection, and to involve children in the research. Thank you. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, or maybe we will also include it in the further discussion.
We'll have time at the end. Thank you very much, Linda, for this insightful presentation. So I think we're ready to, we have an excellent foundation now to move into the panel discussion. So to help you step into the scenario and see it from the perspective of those involved, we have a study case, a case study for you that we will read, and we will also put it in the chat so that you can have a look again if you need. So, okay, I'm just going to read it. Okay. Jane and Dave had been married for 15 years and had 2 children, Alex 14 and Sophia 6. While Dave maintained a respectable public image, Jane experienced years of psychological abuse, threats, and physical violence within the home. Alex witnessed many of these incidents, while Sophia, still too young to understand, displayed increasing signs of anxiety and attachment to her mother. After many years, Jane reported Dave to the authorities. A criminal case was opened for domestic violence and child endangerment, and Dave was directed to attend a perpetrator program. Jane also filed for divorce, requesting sole custody of the children. In family court, significant emphasis was placed on the father's continued involvement. Dave's confident presentation in court carried considerable weight, and the report from the perpetrator program described him as a committed father. Jane's trauma and depressive symptoms stemming from the abuse were cited from the court as concerns regarding her parenting capacity. The court ultimately ordered joint custody and warned Jane that resisting contact could be interpreted as parental alienation. No child-sensitive or trauma-informed interviews were conducted, and the children's direct experiences and fears were not taken into account. During the first visitation, Alex refused to go, and Sophia became highly distressed, but these reactions were dismissed as the result of maternal influence rather than acknowledged as indicators of harm. As a result, the children were placed in a custody arrangement that failed to address the impact of domestic violence and left them exposed to ongoing emotional and psychological risk. So this is the case study that we have prepared for you to understand better and to set the basis to start the panel discussion. We will upload it in the chat now for you to have a look again. And so now I am very happy to give the floor to Mariama and to our panelists. Thank you
Very
very
good.
much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I see that there's very active questions in the chat. So hopefully some of your questions, some of my colleagues are answering them. Others will be answered in the, I'm sure, with the panelists that we have today. So thank you for sharing the case study. I'm going to now turn to Jovanovic. You are the Director of Victim Support Malta. And for all the panelists that will be today, we want this to be, an exchange. So, like we want to hear you entering into a conversation. So really about what are the major issues that you see arising in this case study, and really thinking about how can we best guarantee the child's safety and well-being. But for you, Joan Vela, because you are working in a victim support program and yourself has been also a therapist for many years, how do you think that this case resonates with your experience? What are the insights that you want to bring to us, and what you think of what sort of support these two children actually need? How can programs work better together?
First of all, what strikes me the most is the use of the word parent alienation, and that everything is attributed to that. Something I've seen happening a lot is that it's being used as a buzzword and as a way for the lawyers as well to win the case. And very often as well, a common thing I see is that the voice of the children and those who are most affected, the most vulnerable, is not heard. And this obviously leaves a lot of detrimental effects on the child. So from my and from a therapeutic standpoint, I would come across as being an advocate for the child and finding ways for their voice to be heard. And that just because they are children doesn't mean that they don't have a say or that their views are not valid. But also, I think then from the approach of Director of Victim Support Malta is making sure that there is a space for these voices to be heard, because sometimes what we see from the Maltese perspective, at least, is that, you advocate for them, but when they go to the court of law, it's not necessary that their voices will be heard, or it depends too much on the circumstances, like what judge is presiding, or the type of lawyer, the mother can afford and the type of lawyer the father can afford. So I think I would work, what I see here is the need for the children to be given a voice and for their emotions to be validated and not being seen just so this is your mother's influence, but also then from a social justice perspective, beyond the therapeutic room, working that these spaces become more child-friendly. Because if you empower the client, but the voice is not heard because the environment is not supportive, then it's further re-traumatization, and the child, and this is what very often happens, just learns to be quiet. And not just with children, even with victims of domestic violence. So we hear a lot, what is the point of reporting and going to the court system if I'm going to be further victimized?
Thank you, Joanne. So we probably will come back to that, and also because you are mentioning about what strikes you about parental alienation, and you are actually saying something that resonates a lot for us that are more in the child rights field about the child-centered approach and child-friendly settings. And I'm curious first, before we continue, to listen from Kate Iwi, that you are team manager for Positive Change Service at Tower Hamlets Children's Social Care. So you are working closely with perpetrators, survivors and children through child protection and family court processes. So from your perspective, and hearing just what Joanne has been saying, from a perspective of a therapist and also bringing a bit more, giving more space to children, do you see that? Do actually Perpetrators program give sufficient space to the views of children? Can we actually, is this compatible or not?
I'm not sure that they always do, but it is compatible. The program that I work with is an intervention project that's part of children's social care in London, and so we're only working with parents or people in parenting roles, as a result of which we don't have in some programs, parenting and impacts on children is a small add-on module, whereas our whole program is about this. And I think it's vital because perpetrators like this character in the case study are also very likely to be authoritarian, controlling, violent parents. So they need to completely relearn parenting as part of their program. But they also, and Sandra touched on this, need to learn about the impacts on children, and they need to learn about that as happening from in utero effects on brain development to attachment to, on through a child's life until you're looking at adolescents who might become violent to the domestic abuse survivor, or might be exploited out in the community in gangs or sexually exploited. So all of that takes much more than just a little module. But the other thing, really importantly, is that I think when you have perpetrator programs in child protection services, you begin to move away from a failure to protect narrative where the mother gets blamed, which we're seeing in this case study. And you can focus within the perpetrator work, but also in your survivor services, very much on, again, Sandra showed a slide which she kindly attributed to me, but comes actually from Safe and Together, about impacts on the survivor's parenting. And, this looking at counter-parenting, what I think of as counter-parenting, is key for perpetrator programs. Perpetration, domestic abuse damages the mother's mental health. It undermines her parenting. It might be that the children get weaponized, used in the abuse in some way. But even what I think of as Disney parenting, where a father is involved in only the nice things so that the mother has to do all the rubbish sides of parenting and all the boundary setting, and, even that is counter-parenting, makes it much harder for mothers. And from within the project I work on, we do a lot of consultation with child protection social workers. And we also have a program alongside to actually help children heal. And one of the things we consult a lot with social workers on is really thinking about what is the difference between a child who's been coached to say something and a child who is really speaking their genuine feelings. And it might be they're influenced by the terrible fear of their mother, but that is not parental alienation, so, children who are coached often repeat the same, version of something again and again, and they can't answer questions outside of the ones they've been coached to answer. And, things like this can be looked into, that they're often very scared to speak at all to a professional, even in a child-friendly setting. And I think the final thing I want to say about the case study is how the hell is this mum's commitment to being a good parent being measured? You know, I worry about the way we report to the family courts. I think it's really important to write personal particular reports, because the very general one that just says we can't guarantee this will make the children safer is kind of always it's always taken as, oh, but we know it does make the children safer. So I don't like that. But if you're going to write a very specific personal report, you have to think very carefully, how does someone show a commitment to their responsibilities as a parent rather than their rights as a parent? Are they really accountable for the damage that they've done to their partner's, ex-partner's parenting, to their children? Are they really committed to trying to mend and heal some of that? Yeah.
Interesting. So now you're giving me a bit of a nice transition to see from Donna perspective, to see, because you're talking now, indeed, I mean, it is a lot, you know, is that the right, I mean, parenting, you know, the right of parents versus the right of children, the place of the child within a family, the way that children are being actually seen by the practitioners and the family itself. So Donna, when you hear this, so Kate's perspective, Joanne's perspective, we have here usually victim support programs, perpetrators program. They sometimes collaborate, sometimes they're not necessarily always best friends. We have, thank God, very good examples across different countries of the way that programs could work together. But we also hear also very, concerns because of the protection that needs to be done, especially for the victim, the witnesses. So you, Donna McEwan, you are a practice development advisor at Children and Young People Centre for Justice in Scotland. You're also a member of the Child-Friendly Justice Network. And by hearing now what has been said, do you think that in this work or in this case study, there is sufficient attention put to the rights of those children? And what about the needs assessment? Because we talk about assessing and reporting, and what about the ones for the children?
Yeah, thanks, Mariama. I'm sure it'll be in alignment with probably everybody that's on the call this afternoon, that in terms of the children's rights being upheld, there seems to be a significant gap in the case study that's been presented. I mean, if you just look at, Linda highlighted a number of the articles in the UNCRC that are really important to protect children in particularly where there's domestic abuse. If we think of the best interests of the child, there is a sweeping statement or assumption by the court that would be the priority was more about the parents having equal contact as opposed to what was actually in the best interests of the child. And in order to understand that, there was no participation, Article 12, what was the children's voice in that? But actually, if you really look and think about in the case study, it described the behaviour from both Alex and Sophie. And at times, and I think others have already touched on this, the conflict that children will most likely experience during custody cases, and particularly where there's domestic abuse. We know that coercive control is often a key factor of domestic abuse and domestic violence situations. Children may feel guilt, conflicted loyalty between the parents, between both parents, because one parent acts and causes harm through domestic abuse and domestic violence doesn't stop a child loving that parent. And they may also be conflicted because they're worried about the safety of their other parent, about their siblings, about themselves. And they can feel, somebody mentioned, I think it might have been Joanna, the potential for shame and guilt for children when they are put in the position of what they say is then reflected back and used. So if we think about what trauma-informed would look like in terms of upholding children's rights, how we understand a child's developmental perspective in order to help them express their views. And there's already been mention of the role of safeguarders, how there can be a buffer between the child and both parents, not just the parent who has caused or alleged to have caused harm through domestic abuse. And particularly in this case, the criminal case has not been completed. So we would be talking about an alleged harm. But we would have enough, certainly within Scotland, to undertake child protection, to consider it through that lens first and foremost. And I think in terms of the best interest of the child protection lens for domestic abuse is absolutely the right way to look at that and uphold children's rights within this context. And certainly as well, just a point that occurred to myself was the reinforcing or the mirroring of the systems. The system mirrored the father's approach potentially in terms of blaming the mother's mental health as a reason for her not being able to parent, whereas actually that's the effect of living with domestic abuse and domestic violence, and how we have to be really mindful that the system does not continue to reinforce the same harms as what somebody has already experienced. So not just re-traumatizing, but causing new trauma. And also about the importance of hearing again, coming back to the child's voice, as well, because that may also be part of the domestic abuse and domestic violence they've experienced, which, sorry, somebody just commented on that about the child's voice or how they're communicating, whether that's through distress behaviour or verbally, making sure that we're open and we hear that. We don't just ask, but don't actually do anything with that. Is that okay?
Yes, no, very, you give a lot. And also I see that in the chat, some people are commenting because so far all of you have said the importance to have, child-friendly setting, to give the space for children to express their views. And then someone was commenting in the chat about, but how do you make sure they can speak, but what is the accountability that you then give to the child? What would you do with that, with what the child has been said? So maybe I can turn to Natalia now, Batenkova. So you are with Unison in Sweden. You are in international project management and also working a lot in victim support. So does it resonate with you? And maybe also thinking of that particular case study, when we say, or when we hear saying today about can we actually effectively also, when we work with victims, or thinking about mothers or fathers, because there's also someone in the chat mentioning, we often give that example of the violent father and the mother, but it also appears in the other way around. So what is, in your opinion, what is done, or what may be some example from Sweden about how you take into consideration the rights or the perspective of children?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I can totally resonate with everything that the panelists before me were mentioning. Just a couple of words so that you understand what kind of organization I come from. We're a National Association of Women's Shelters and Crisis Centers for Women, Young Women and Youth in Sweden. And we are currently uniting over 140 women's organizations all over Sweden. We have a massive experience of working not only with women exposed to mass violence, but also children. Practically, the case study that you presented, there's nothing exceptional. Even here in Sweden, we see this kind of cases all the time, and also this kind of proceedings and decisions that are unfortunately taken. In Sweden, we have an estimate of 4,200 cases of forced custody per year, and in the majority of these cases, we have mass violence against women at home. What we can say is that, unfortunately, even though we have recently had changes in legislation, we still experience that the court proceedings, the implementation of the more child-friendly law is behind. So what I would like to stress on is that we see from our experiences and from years of research that children have their agency, and that in this kind of court proceedings and cases, their agency is overlooked. So we see that children are used as a reason, as a subject. You weaponize the custody. But we do not really put the interest, needs, and the agency of children in the center. And what we also see in our practice is that children are not aware of their agency themselves because they have a lot of blame and guilt also connected to that they were not able to help out, that they were not there for their mothers, or probably the violence occurred because of them. And what our member organizations in Sweden work with is to highlight, to help children understand their resistance, because we see that different coping strategies, different acts that children have when they are experiencing their fathers, for instance, violence against their mothers, that is the acts of resistance. And by highlighting them, by helping them understand that when they close their ears, that's the coping strategy, that is the resistance. When they go and go to bed together with their siblings when they start hearing the noises downstairs. That is a coping strategy. That helps restore children's dignity, and that helps also empower them to cope with it in the long term, in the long run. What we did also in Sweden a couple of years ago, we gathered data. Unfortunately, you cannot do this kind of research with small children, but what we did, we gathered data from young adults that experienced the parents, their fathers' violence against mothers, or partners' violence against mothers when they were children, and they were exposed to forced custody or forced visitation. And then we summarized it in a report that practically showed that most of the children, these young adults, that participated in the studies, over 1,000 children or young adults that participated, they could still, up until now, experience trauma and long-term psychological problems. So that is very necessary to highlight and to be aware of, both among the practitioners working with children, with women exposed to violence, with perpetrators. But when we talk about court proceedings, the legal system professionals should be aware of it and have the knowledge-based decisions taken.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. And I think that giving that, understanding a bit better how that works in Sweden. And thank you also for explaining to us all the role that you are playing, and also the different organizations that are part of your network. And you are emphasizing the importance of children's agency. And I want to turn now to Joanne and maybe hear more with your hat of a therapist. I mean, how can we speak about children's agency when children feel scared, or when we would talk about conflict of loyalty, of can you give us an example, or maybe of who needs to accompany the child and how? So we hear about some services, but sometimes children's agency, it's something that it's good when you are in a safe setting, but what when you are not in a safe setting?
And I think this is a very common theme that I used to see, that children, no matter how abusive the parent is, very often they still have a certain loyalty to them and a love towards them. For children, that is very confusing. So how can I be angry at someone when I also love them? And sometimes it's about introducing the concept that we can love someone, doesn't necessarily mean that they are good for us, and that We need to have a close relationship with them. And these two things can exist at the same time, that you can love someone, but also acknowledge that what they do is bad. And sometimes, as children are very loyal to their parent, even if the parent is abusive, I like to say that, listen, no matter what you tell me about your parent, I won't think they are some evil monster. I might think that deep down, but I definitely won't express that to the child. And I feel that creates the safe that, I can speak about my parent, but I won't paint them in such a bad light because they'll be still seen as human. So I think from a therapeutic standpoint is that providing that space where they can express these conflicting emotions, and it is okay to have these conflicting emotions. And sometimes it's something we do also with adult survivors of abuse, that they would find it hard to speak ill of their parent, especially if the parent has passed. So it's not just an issue related to children. So that's mostly what I do in the therapeutic room, and also encouraging them that, listen, in the end, the responsibility does not lie on them. So if they speak up and something happens to the father is an adult, or the mother, in this case, they took a decision if the mother is abusive. And if anything happens to them, it is because of their own decisions. So repeating that, and also kind of allowing the space for them to process their emotions, whether it's by speaking, whether it's through creative means. So those feelings come out. They are in a safe place, they come out, and they have a place where they can speak about them. Because very often, even with the parent who was the victim, they find it hard to speak because they take on a very caregiving role of the parent, and they don't want to burden them even further. So having that therapeutic space where they can make sense of their conflicting feelings. As a therapist, I like to do it the creative means. So identifying colors for the feelings, getting out our feelings through body movement, drawing what's in our head. I think that is helpful. And sometimes even if we need to, advocating for the child in the court, or preparing them as well for what the court system might look like. Sometimes what I do with children is, when I know they have court, we create safety objects like a bracelet they can take to help ground themselves, an image they can keep in mind. And to be fair, this is not with just child clients, even with adults who have to go to court. So, but obviously then I always believe that personally, the work does not stop within the therapeutic room. So even before I was director of Victim Support Malta, I believe that as therapists, we have to advocate for the system to change, because I think if we empower the client, but the system is not supportive, I'm not saying there isn't progress, but it's limited. And there is the risk of further victimization or re-traumatization. So the judges, the lawyers, they also have to be trained, because, or else in a way, our tools are ineffective, but they're not as effective as they could be.
Yes, indeed, and I think that maybe you're referring a lot to, so emotions, safety objects. So that's the role of the, the therapeutic work throughout, let's say, maybe the proceedings. And sometimes how compatible is that with children's rights? I mean, we know that there's a right of the child to feel safe. It's at the core also of children's rights. And I'm wondering what Kate or Donna maybe have to say about that. And is there space? Is there enough time for also the legal professionals that are involved to understand that there must be this support also that the child needs to have throughout the custody or the criminal case, as we are mentioning that often they go in parallel?
I think it's very important that child protection workers, social workers, they're called in the UK, but that they really understand that using the kinds of tools that have just been mentioned, drawing and things like that, and observation, is a very good way to represent children's needs and feelings in court, partly because it doesn't tear the child's loyalties in the same way, and it doesn't put the child potentially at risk when they then do have contact with a parent. Like, if you ask a child, who do you want to spend time with, and then if it, they have to then deal with whatever their parents are going to put on them after that, in terms of feeling let down or angry or whatever else. Whereas if a social worker is trained to observe and use drawing and things like that, then it's not quite the same as saying the child said this. And I don't think they can be punished in the same, quite the same way for it.
Yes.
I also want to say that I think trauma bonding is a real problem around this area, that, we all have an idea of, certainly the Swedish have an idea of Stockholm syndrome, and then we've got, how that plays out in the family when there's an abuser in the family, who can use sort of, alternate threat with love, with threat with love, can build up a very strong bond that way with a child. At the same time, by breaking down the mother, reduces the sort of power difference between mother and child, so that she has less and less control and he has more and more control. And I think these things really need taking into account when we are thinking about what children are saying. Because a child may well say, I want to be with my very violent, controlling dad. And I think it takes some training to be able to really think, what is that about?
Thank you, Kate. Donna,
I
did you
may
want
say
to?
quickly,
Oh,
I
yes,
agree completely.
go ahead.
Children speak very often to play. So very often it's not what they say, it's how they play, which kind of reflects what they're going through. But of course, then the courts have to be willing to accept that sort of evidence, because usually I struggle, because for them it's wishy-washy stuff. It's not hard evidence.
Definitely. And often indeed, that's we also, when we speak with children, they tell us, the one that have been through the system, that they've felt a bit used, like children witness. I mean, does it resonate with you, Donna? Or do you see that in the research that you're carrying out?
Yes, sorry, the point I really wanted to make just from what people are saying, sorry, apologies, Mariama, is that actually we continue to fit children into systems that are designed by and for adults. And actually, if we want a truly rights upholding system for whether it's domestic abuse or any procedural, legal, administrative justice environment, we have to design this based for children, and stop enforcing adult needs onto our children. And I think that then would ensure that our assessments are holistic, that they're multi-agency, that they're based on capacity and developmental positioning of children, and that actually what is truly in their best interests is what will come from these processes. And having, certainly in Scotland, we have a slightly different setup than yourselves, Kate, from England, in terms of all our work with individuals convicted through the justice system, so individuals convicted of offences involving domestic abuse are overseen by social workers from criminal justice, and where and also in Scotland, any domestic incident where there is a child present will automatically be reported. I think that will be the same across the UK, but it will automatically be reported to social work and will consider and trigger child protection consideration. It might not require that level of response, but the child's views are very much and what's in the best interest at the centre the justice system is where quite often these things fall down. So I have to say I'm an advocate for redesigning a proper child-friendly justice system that actually takes children's rights and children's needs to the core of everything going forward. So not quite the question you asked me, Mariama, but I think from what everybody's saying, that might be the way forward.
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, you in a way you are answering the question, because when you talk about child-friendly justice, it's child-centered justice, then it means that all the needs, are taken care of. So, and I see that we are slowly but nicely approaching the end of the of this webinar, and I wanted to know if our panelists had a last word, and then I had 1 minute that I wanted to share a resource for the one that are listening to us, because we have a fact sheet that we wanted to mention to you and share in the chat, but maybe to see if our panelists have a last thing to say or last word for the audience. Yeah? So we start with Natalia. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Donna, what you said, I totally agree. And we need to, in my opinion, redefine the best interest for children also, and how we understand it. I just wanted to say that another factor that is very important to take into consideration is that by forced visitation and forced custody, we actually can not only cause psychological harm to children, but also we can put them in direct danger, because we know that even after separation, the violence continues in most of the cases. And we know that violent fathers, violent partners use this forced visitation, forced custody to get to the mothers. And unfortunately, we have seen too many cases of children being harmed and, in worst case, murdered. So that is the system's responsibility to take it into consideration and to take decisions derived from that.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. Thank you for sharing this indeed. Anyone else would like to compliment? Yeah, so Joanne and Donna. Mm-hmm.
I think the importance of all the systems to work together, because at least in Malta, although we're a very, very small island, things are still very fragmented, even though, I mean, we could easily work together, because it's not like we're anyway obstructed by some large distance. We're very small, but for some reason, there's still that fragmentation of services, and this is a detriment to our clients and to service users. So I think that is something I've been emphasizing for years now. Hopefully one day I am heard.
We wish. Thank you for
Yes.
reminding that. Donna? Mm-hmm.
Just to say that this is a very complex area, and the impact of domestic abuse and domestic violence on those that experience it, whether it's directly or living within that environment, it affects them throughout their life. And quite often those who then go on to act in that manner or involved with the justice system have experienced domestic abuse and violence in their background. That's not to say that most people that experience it will go on to act in that way. This is a hindsight looking backwards. We know that, so I'm not being predictive in what I'm saying, but we have to address this as the complex intersectional issue that it is, because simple responses will not address this international issue against violence against women and children.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you very much. Kate? Mm-hmm.
So I did put something in the chat in response to someone else, but child protection systems just put so much burden on victim survivors that, they've got to do loads of work, come to loads of meetings. And it's time that we started putting all that weight on the perpetrators. They should be the ones doing all of the work, coming to all of the meetings. It's like, let's address that planet's issue a bit.
Thank you, all of you. I'm looking now at Sarah. I find that there was so much that we could have continued another hour to dig in, some of the important topics that you have raised. Of course, this is a webinar, so there was so much time that we have, but I think we have brought a bit some of the topics. I mean, through a case study, some presentations, and maybe before we do some closing, I wanted to mention that we have published, and maybe one of my colleagues can put in the chat, a legal fact sheet for practitioners that will be accessible from our website, and there will also be a link that we will create from the European Network of Work Perpetrators of Domestic Violence, and that fact sheet is actually a very useful document if you want to know about what framework applies, the European and international framework, but also from a child rights lens, what is at stake when children are victims, witnesses of domestic violence. And we refer to also the relevant case law from the European Court of Human Rights. And with some also a glossary of terms, some definitions. We spoke today about parental alienation, we speak about needs assessment, risk assessment. And so that fact sheet also explains a little bit more what we are talking about, because as we have understood, as Donna mentioned, this is a complex area. The idea is to provide practitioners, and hopefully you in the audience today, with more understanding of what is at stake and what terminology also can be used. So I want to now, with Sarah, maybe you want to have some words about also maybe the next steps, and I would like to thank you also for the work with Perpetrators of Domestic Violence, and of course all the panelists, but for this collaboration that is really only starting, because we have other things that we will do together also in the near future.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to everyone for participating in today's webinar. We hope you found the discussion interesting and useful for your work. Then, of course, also a big thank you to our speakers for sharing their expertise and insights, and also to all of you for listening and being active in the chat. WWP and the European Network for Child-Friendly Justice, of course, will continue working together on this issue. So if you'd like to know more, stay connected, or just if you have any questions that you would like to ask, just please feel free to email us, and we would love to hear from you. And then, of course, we'll also work on different topics together. So now we're focusing on child victims of domestic violence. Then in the future, we will focus maybe on child perpetrators of domestic violence. So yeah, the topic will just change and develop. And we also have a feedback form for you that we would be grateful if you could fill in to let us know your thoughts. I think you can find it in the chat. And yeah, thank you once again. And we wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you very much, everyone. If you could take a minute to fill in the feedback form, you will also receive it by email. This helps us also to know if we are responding to your needs, and to do also better for the next times. And thank you indeed, my colleagues are sharing the emails. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye. Thank you
very
for
much.
being
Bye.
here. We can, I see some still